So I actually changed the title of my presentation. It was, "Can Democracy Survive the Polarizing Forces of Our Times?" But is this the most recent that we have up, Nobu? This is what I changed it to. Thank you. So I put that title up before Trump was elected. And things have moved very quickly in the last few weeks, as you well know. So I changed it to "From Polarization to Domination, the Battle for Democracy in a Fast-Changing World." And I have to say that I'm an American. It's with great humility that I speak to you on this subject of global challenges to democracy, because I feel right now the U.S. is the biggest threat to democracy in the world, which is very concerning. But before I talk about what happened in the U.S. or in these last few weeks, I do want to look at the world at large, because we can focus too much on America, and we shouldn't do that. So 2024 was a massive year for elections worldwide. There were some elections in something like 70 countries. Half the world's population had elections. Some 2 billion people voted. And many said that this year of so many elections would be a real test for democracy. So what were some of the takeaways from that year? Average voter turnout actually rose for the first time in 20 years. So that is a good thing. Interestingly, incumbents, those who already had power, largely lost, whether they were to the left or to the right. And it's the first time in the West that every single governing party lost vote share. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction with how governments are operating. That is one takeaway. And I think the third is we can see a lot of disillusionment with democracy. A recent survey in the US said that 50% of people do not believe that democracy serves their interests. So this is a real concern. There were some strong displays of popular will for democracy. I'll just give two quick examples. In Senegal, pre-election protests led to the release of the major opposition leader from prison. And he went on, he was 44 years old, went on to have a sweeping victory. So it's a case where public pressure really affected things and led to a more free and fair election. He was not imprisoned for any good reason. In Bangladesh, as many of you know, Prime Minister Hasina, who was running for a 5th term, declared herself winner. There were massive protests. She ended up fleeing the country. Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus now leads an interim government. But there's a lot of struggles. It is very difficult to recover democracy once it's really been undermined. So how that will go, we don't yet know. We also saw a lot of suppression and new forms of interference. In Tunisia, which was the birthplace of the Arab Spring, democracy has largely been snuffed out, really destroyed. Pretty much all the opposition candidates were jailed. In Venezuela, the President Maduro promised a free election. This was actually an exchange for the U.S. agreeing to lift sanctions to allow Chevron, the oil company, to pump and export oil. But he basically declared, it was very clear that Edmundo Gonzalez won, but Maduro refused to concede, and Gonzalez ended up fleeing to Spain for his safety. And then in the US, which I fear might becoming a trendsetter in what we don't want to see, there was a lot of problems. There was increased disinformation right before the election, much of which was linked to foreign interference. There was evidence of interference from both Russia and Iran right on the eve of the election in so-called swing states in the U.S. There was a lot of efforts at voter suppression, at getting people off the voter rolls, particularly marginalized group, blacks and Latinos, in states where there was fear that they would go Democratic. And as you know, Elon Musk played a huge role. He donated $200 million to Trump's campaign, obviously with his own interests in mind. Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame owns the Washington Post, one of our major newspapers. He would not allow them to endorse Kamala Harris. Traditionally, newspapers in the U.S. are free to endorse a political candidate. They withdrew the endorsement. So this influence of billionaires is very concerning. Particularly in the U.S., though I have to say we see it in India as well. So looking more globally, and this is from what's known as the V-Dem Liberal Democracy Index, which is the most respected of the democracy indices in the world. They have some 71 indicators for democracy. A few examples are guarantee of individual liberties, checks on power of state institutions, fair election, freedom of expression and association. So it's a very thorough list. And what's very striking is that since 2009, on all these factors, democracy has been declining. So this graph, it's separated out according to different regions of the world, but the blue line is sort of aggregate of what we see in the world at large. And you can see since 2009, this ongoing decline. Some 71% of the world's population now live in autocracies. Some of them are so-called electoral autocracies, where a president is voted, but not in a free and fair election. And 42 countries are in the process of going more autocratic. 18, according to this index, is moving more towards democracy, but the shift in the last, since 2009, is really huge. I think back in 2009, it was just the opposite. 70% of the world or so were living in democracies. We do see a few counterexamples. Brazil is trying to recover from Bolsonaro, from their autocracy. We see efforts to recover in Poland, Bangladesh, I mentioned. But as I said earlier, once democracy is undermined, it's unfortunately very difficult to get it back. I just wanted to show you one more example of one of these indexes because I thought they have many different ones. You can find it on their website if you're interested. This one looks at deliberative aspects of democracy. How are decisions being reached? They look at things like consultation and citizen engagement, respect for counter-arguments. Is there room to debate? Is there a focus on common good? Again, if you look at that blue line, we see the sharp decline since 2009, that the space for deliberation is really shrinking. So that's another concern. One of the things that we're looking at in Global Challenges to Democracy at Toda is trying to understand all the many factors. This is a little bit like the diagram that Kevin showed you earlier, that are interacting and contributing with each other to lead to this decline in democracy. So I'm not going to take you through it, but that was just to give you a sense. But so many trends. It includes definitely growing inequality, which Kevin mentioned. The richest 1% of the world now own close to half of the world's wealth. The wealth of billionaires grew 3 times faster last year than the year before. And we're seeing this influence of wealth in elections, certainly in the U.S.'s last election. Other factors, there's so many, but to list a few, include mass migration, the kind of xenophobia that brings about, fears around immigration, people losing their sense of identity, cultural identity, mass migration due to climate change, due to unemployment, vast unemployment in so many parts of the world, particularly for youth. Violent conflict, Kevin mentioned how many violent conflicts there are right now in the world. Gang violence, polarization exacerbated by social media, and the list goes on. So what I would say is these trends have been building up gradually, and what we've seen in many places in the world where democracy is eroding, that there's this gradual erosion. In the US, it's been very sudden. We had this really explosive first 3 weeks of Donald Trump's presidency. There was some 100 executive orders that he signed in his very first week. We're all losing track of them, and that was intentional. Many of them are illegal. They're against our Constitution, but it's going to take a long time to challenge them in the courts, and this feels like a very deliberate strategy. So there were some 17 on immigration, declaring an invasion at our southern border, which allows for military intervention, mass deportations, trying to end birthright citizenship, which is for decades been the case in the U.S., that if you're born in the U.S., we are a country of immigrants, you can get citizenship. He's trying to, so in our Constitution, but he signed an executive order trying to end it. Kevin mentioned this effort to end U.S. foreign aid. The list goes on. Withdrawal from the Paris agreements. Withdrawal from the World Health Organization. The pardoning of 1,600 rioters charged for January 6th invasions of our capital, who were in prison, many for violent crimes against police, all pardoned. Firing inspector generals who are the sort of watchdogs at federal agencies. Again, this is illegal. You're supposed to give rationale. You're supposed to give Congress 30 days notice, but just fired. And, you know, there's a lot now, of course, happening with Elon Musk, and you've heard about his so-called DOGE, the Office of Government Efficiency, just trying to gut our federal civil service. So very worrying. Again, this can be pushed back in the courts, but it will take time. So we are seeing resistance to these efforts, and that's important. I know this went viral on social media, so the woman on the left up there is an Episcopal priest at the Washington Cathedral, and she was leading the traditional church service the day after the inauguration, and she looked directly at President Trump and urged him, sort of out of his religious faith, to show mercy for the hundreds and thousands of people who were extremely frightened, including immigrants, including children who were afraid that their parents would be deported, including asylum seekers who are in the country legally. So this was a real moment. Trump did not look happy when she looked at him and delivered this, but it was a moment afterwards. I think it was the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops came out with a similar statement, and other religious leaders did as well. Legal challenges have begun. There have been various court filings around many of these executive orders, but again, this is going to take time. A lot can happen from the state and local government. We are a federal system, so states have certain powers. So I think everybody's caught off guard by the quantity of things that were pushed through in the first 3 weeks, but they're trying to think through what can be challenged, where do they have some autonomy to push back. And there's a lot of civil society action unfolding. There's something called Democracy Network, which is a alliance of 350 legal organizations that are coordinating around legal efforts. There's a lot of NGOs who work around immigration issues, trying to organize. So a lot of effort is happening, and that's important. But I think what I find most worrying is that we're seeing in the US this alliance of autocracy and oligarchy. And that the tech billionaires have sort of cozied up to Trump. This was the cover of a recent magazine in the U.S., The New Yorker, and this was on the week of Trump's inauguration, and you see there's Elon Musk taking the oath of office, and Trump is sort of barely visible off to the side. And we saw this with Facebook as well, with Zuckerberg deciding we don't need fact checkers anymore. Clearly, Trump's proposed fiscal policies are only going to benefit the wealthy. All the promises he made to working class people who have grievances, who feel that they've suffered, are not going to happen. But his whole fiscal policy is really aimed at the wealthy. And the conflicts of interest and rampant signs of corruption are very, very worrying. I mean, Elon Musk, for example, has these huge government contracts, and yet he wasn't elected to any office, he wasn't appointed by our Congress, but he's having this just enormous influence. So the big question is, what will be the impact of what I'm calling an imperial Trump on the world stage? This is him speaking to the World Economic Forum in Davos on this huge screen, and you see these world political leaders and business leaders looking somewhat small underneath him. And he's good at being a bully. So I think it's going to be very, very important that world leaders, of course, they have their own country's interests in mind, and they have to be careful. We can understand that. But it's going to be really important that people feel they can stand up to him. And we definitely feel the same thing with our elected officials, with our Congress and Senate, to not allow Trump to sort of bully his way through. So to end on a more hopeful note, at Global Challenges to Democracy last June, we launched something it's a web platform that we're calling the Democracy Lighthouse. This is not in your handout. I just thought to add it later, but you can find it online if you Google. And because there are democracy institutes all over the world working on democracy. And we now have 300 listed across the globe, and our next effort is going to be to start to get content from them about new things they're trying to advocate for democracy, to promote democracy, and to create some kind of exchange so that it can feel like a bit of a movement, that we feel this decline, this erosion of democracy, of Trump sort of taking center stage in the world, but all the more important that we recognize that there are so many good efforts around the world. So I did want to end on that hopeful note. So thank you.